Hello and welcome to this week's lesson on JavaScript function. I'm inside week 6 and the first thing I want to do, change the name of the template file. I'm going to call it functions.html, and I'm going to open this file with Text Wrangler. This time I'm just going to drag it. Hopefully it's going to work out. There we go. So now inside the code editor, I'm going to change the title. I'm going to call it JavaScript Functions. I'm going to save that, and I'm going back to the folder and open that file up with Firefox. The usual deal. Let's go back to the code editor. So we're going to be working first inside the head section. So I actually inside the head section, so just below the title, I'm going to enter a couple lines, and I'm going to use my script tag, and right away close the script tag. And if you've done the reading in your textbook and you follow along so far, the syntax for creating a function is going to look very familiar. It's very similar to what we've done before. It's just the word function that changes. So we used var before, we used while loop before, but the structure is very similar. So to create a function, we use a generic word function, all lowercase, and then we have to come up with a unique name for our function, and I have decided to call my function greet visitor. It's very common to, when you create function names, to include a verb to indicate the action that occurs inside a function. Right after the name, I'm going to have open and close parentheses, space, open and close curly braces. And then I'm going to separate my curly braces by a couple lines. So inside this function, what I want to happen, I want an alert box to pop up that greets a visitor. So I'm going to use alert, and inside alert, I'm just going to use a very generic messages just like good day. Making sure that I balance my parentheses and I balance my quotes. I'm going to save that and go back to Firefox, and I'm going to reload. And nothing happens. And that's exactly what I expected, because when you put the code inside a function, your JavaScript code inside a function, it is stored inside the browser's memory. It's not executed as the page is being rendered. So it's just there and it's ready to be executed when the function is called. So how do we call a function? So go back to the code here. So let's say we go inside the body section now. I'm going to use my script tag again and right away close it. So if I want to call a function, meaning if I want to execute a function, I can just enter its name. The name of the function that we came up with is greet visitor. So I'm going to enter exactly how I have it spelled with visitor. And I have to include visitor, there's too many S's there. I have to include the parentheses. So the exact name with the correct spelling, included the parentheses and a semicolon after. So if I save that and go back to Firefox and reload my page, now I do have an alert box that pops up. That's a very simple example. A more interesting example is to actually use I wait for the visitor to do an action and call the function in response to the visitor's action. One of the simplest things we can create is a button. A button is created with the HTML tag button. So I'm going to enter button and right away close it. And inside the button, I have to put a text that's being displayed inside the button. So I'm going to use the word greetings. And I just want to show you what it looks like first. So I'm saving this file, go back to Firefox, and then reload. We have our alert box. I'm going to comment that out in a second. And then we have our button that shows up. So instead of having the alert box showing up immediately, I would like that to come up when I click, or when the user clicks on this button. So how to do that? Go back to the code editor. First of all, we want to comment out the call to the function. I'm going to use 2 forward slashes right away, and notice that the text changes to a gray color, indicating that it's a comment. So if I want that function to be executed or called in response to a user clicking on a button, we can use this syntax. Inside the opening tag, right before the closing angle bracket, I enter a couple spaces, and I'm going to say on click. On click meaning as the user clicks on this element, which in this case is a button, I want the function to be called. So we have to have an equal sign and double quotes right after. Let's create a little bit of space so it's a bit easier to read. So inside the quotes, I'm going to have to put the name of the function, just like we did before. Greet visitor and parentheses. No need for a semicolon there. I'm going to save that. And then we're going to see, as we go back to Firefox and reload, that the alert box doesn't come up right away. But when I click, if I didn't make any mistakes, when I click on a button, greetings, there we go, my alert box shows up. So that is probably more in line with what you've been experiencing. So far, all our JavaScript code got executed immediately as soon as the page loaded. Now, with functions, we have a little bit more control of what's going to happen. Now we're going to go back to our code editor, and we're going to make our function a little bit more interesting. Let's say I don't want to have good day being displayed all the time. I would like this message to change, depending maybe on the day or time of the day or whatever. But you don't want to have the same message being displayed all the time. How to do that? That's where parameters come in. So inside the parentheses of the function declaration, I'm going to enter some kind of a placeholder text, just a very general word, and you come up with a word yourself. It's a name of a variable, so I'm going to call it message because it makes sense to me. It's just a placeholder. There's nothing in it so far. And instead of having alert good day, I don't want that message to be displayed all the time. So I want to be able to change that. So I'm going to enter the word message. That is a variable. A parameter is just a variable. In this particular case, it doesn't have a value yet because I haven't defined it. But I know when I give it a value, it will be displayed using alert. So just think about it. The best way to think about it is that it's a placeholder. So now this is a much more generic way of creating a function. Now I can go back to my button and I have my function all set up, and inside the parentheses I can decide what to say. So let's say I want to say good morning. So I'm going to enter good morning in quotes. Why in quotes? Because this is actually a value. It's a string. So a string needs a quote. I'm going to save that, and actually I'm going to create 2 more buttons, and I'm going to change the message each time. So I'm going to copy this line and I'm going to paste it below a couple times. And instead of having good morning all the times, I'm going to have good afternoon the second time, and the third time I'm going to say good evening. They're always calling the same function, greet visitor, but a message being displayed is going to be different all the times. I'm going to save that, go back to my page, reload, and now I have 3 buttons. Notice that buttons are inline elements, meaning that they will line up next to each other as long as there's enough space. So if I click on the first button, the message comes up. It says good morning. If I click on a second button, it says good afternoon. And of course, if I click on a third button, it says good evening. So you can see that this function becomes much more useful because a message can be a different one all the time. And it's only being displayed when the user actually does something, like clicking on that button. Let's go back to the code editor. All right, so this, let's go back to the head section here. I'm just going to add a comment here. I'm going to say function with 1 parameter. one parameter. Okay, I want to create a little bit more space below. You can enter as many parameters as you want into your function. So I'm going to create an example of a function with 2 parameters, and I'm going to create a function that is called, that's going to add 2 numbers. And so I'm just going to call it add, and my 2 placeholder values, my 2 parameters, I just call it generically x and y. I could call them whatever I want. I just want 2 placeholder variables there that will store that information. Then I'm going to have my curly braces and then break my curly braces onto different lines. So what I want to happen is that once I'm inside a function, I want to add those 2 numbers and store them in a third variable that I'm going to call result, or res for short. So I'm going to create a new variable called res for results, and that's going to be the result of adding x plus y. Create a little bit more space there so it's more legible. And once I calculated that information, I mean that number, I am going to display with alert. Okay, so that's my function. Now remember that if I just create a function, nothing's going to happen. I actually have to call the function to execute that code. So what I'm going to do is create another button that's going to say add numbers. And when the user clicks on that button, so I'm going to come into the opening button tag, and right before the closing angle bracket, I'm going to say on click. I'm going to have my quotes. I guess it could be double quotes or single quotes, doesn't matter as long as you balance them out. But you're probably better off using double quotes because notice, for example, in this particular case above here, I had to enter a string. So I had double quotes and single quotes, and I have to make sure that I don't mix them up. So typically it's safe, so if you start with single quotes on the outside, use double quotes on the inside, or vice versa, like I did here. In this particular case, because they're just numbers, doesn't matter so much. So coming back to this button, when the user clicks on this button, what do I want to happen? I want to call the function add. So I'm going to enter the name of the function and parentheses right after. And what do I want to add? 2 different numbers. So I'm going to enter the number 28, 39. Why comma there? Because that's exactly what you have to do. When you enter a list of parameters, they're all separated by a comma. So the function will take these 2 numbers. X is going to be equal to 28. Y is going to be equal to 39. It's going to add them up, save them in a variable called res, and then display them with alert. I'm going to save this, coming back to my page, reload. I have my new button here that says add numbers, and here we go. We get a result of 67. Coming back to the code. Okay, but sometimes you don't want to display for example, in the case of calculation, let's say that this is a very simple function, but let's say you want to create another function that multiplies numbers. But you don't want to display the numbers right away because perhaps you want to do something else with that. So how can you retrieve the information that has been, or the calculation has been done in a function and use it with something else without actually going ahead and redisplay it? That's when you use return. So let's create a little space here. Let's create another function. I'm going to call it multiply. And I'm going to have my parentheses, curly braces. Really just a very good habit to create the general syntax first and then fill in an information. Inside the parentheses, I'm going to use 2 parameters again. As I said, I can call them what I want, but I decided to call them A and B this time for no particular reason. Those are just placeholder values. So I'm going to calculate my result again. And I'm going to say A, the result is A times B. And if you recall, times you use an asterisk for that. And this time I do not want to display the result right away, but I want to return it. So I want to return it to the page, to the code, so that I can do something with it, later on, whatever I need to do. So I can use the word return and the name of the value, or the name of the variable, res in this case. So now I'm going to copy this line, I'm going to paste it below, and I'm going to change, instead of add, I'm going to use multiply. So I'm going to change the word add to multiply, and I'm going to change the name of the function from add to multiply. Nothing should happen when I click on this button, because I'm not printing to the page with document right, or I'm not creating an alert box. I'm just doing the calculation and returning that information. So let me save that and go out to the page and reload. So I have my multiply numbers button. I click on it and nothing happens. That's exactly what I expected to happen. Nothing happens because I'm not displaying to the page. The calculation is being done, but it's not being displayed to the page. Well, not particularly useful if I don't do anything with that. So I'm going to create a script function, new script section just below. And inside this section, I want to do a little bit more complicated calculation. So, and I'm going to store a result of that calculation inside a variable called total. So let's say I want to multiply a couple numbers, 12 times 36, and then I want to add the results of another multiplication. Oh, that will be, I don't know, 11 by 47. I just coming up with odd numbers like that. So you see, in this case, why you wouldn't want to have the results being displayed right away, because your calculation is actually a little bit more complicated. It's two sets of multiplications. Now, once you've done that, then you want to display it. So afterwards, you can use alert total. Function will be called, the function multiply will be called twice. The first time with these two sets of numbers, the second time with these two sets of numbers. And then those two results will be added and stored inside a variable called total, and the results will be displayed using alert. I'm going to go back to Firefox and I'm going to reload this. And here we have the results being displayed, 949. Back to the code editor. Just want to point out a couple things for function. This kind of covers most of the information about functions. Let me add a couple comments first. So I'm going to say function with two parameters here, and then for the third function I'm going to say function with return value. Save that. I just want to point out to you the fact that I use the word var inside the two function. Let me spelling here, function. In your book, it talks about global and local variables. So in other words, whatever is created, any variable that's created outside a function, it's global in scope, meaning that its value is available anywhere, outside and inside a function. But inside a function, it's like a little world in itself. So when I create a variable inside a function using the word var, this variable, in this case res, only lives inside the space of the function. So the scope, its scope is local. It's kind of a funny concept. You just kind of have to wrap your head around that. And just to make you notice, here I'm using the same variable name. In both cases, it's a variable called res, but this res is not the same as the other res in the other function. These are completely different variables, although they have the same name, because they've been created inside a function with var and only lived inside a function. Outside the function, they don't exist unless you pass their value to the outside world of JavaScript with either return or you print it out. But they only exist inside a function. Just for a habit, it's the safest thing to do when you do any type of calculations or so forth inside a function, to create local variables, just in case you might be using a variable name that corresponds to a variable created on the outside of the function, and then by mistake, involuntarily, change its value. So stick with local variables as much as you can inside the functions, unless you have a very good reason for doing otherwise. Now I wanted to show you what the assignment might look like. So for the assignment, I'm asking you to create a page. Let me draw this down. A page that has a painting and 4 buttons, and these 4 buttons, when clicked on, will change the background color of a div, so that you have an idea of the color would look, the painting would look like on a wall. So if I click on red, I have this red background. If I click on yellow, I have different background, and so forth. So not only the background of the div, but also the name of the painting changes. That's what I'm asking you to do. And the assignment spells out all the instructions, and you should have enough information to be able to do this without too much trouble. So until the next time.